All right, Danielle, episode 18, which is Life Path 9 and at work. They are the humanitarians. So it is about people, purpose, and impact overall. So what we're going to talk about today is career crossroads. So when you maybe are looking, we've had this conversation in some of the previous episodes, and you're not sure what to do, but when you're at this crossroads, what does that look like? How do you make changes and pivots? How do you evaluate that yourself? How do you find your purpose again and what you're meant to do? So we're going to dive on into that and have a conversation. Shout out to socialjobs.com for sponsoring the Worksties in this episode of the Worksties. All right, to kick it off, let's just have a conversation. Today, where are you at, do you feel like, in your career crossroads in your journey, Danielle?
Yeah, I don't I feel like I wish I had more of a clear focus because I really don't. I mean, this last year has been such a journey, and May 1st will officially be a year since I was laid off in my last role at Clover. And I didn't think I would, that it would take this long. Those are like famous last words right now. And it's not that I haven't worked at all because I have to some degree, but not full time, not 100% committed, 100% of my time to any one thing. And I know that there's a lot of people who are in a similar situation as I am, which I mean, is heartening, but at the same time, it's not. And I've started to see a number of people, landing things that are in talent acquisition and not both, outside of talent acquisition and then some within. And I guess I'm just like, you know, I don't think I'm having an existential crisis, but in a little bit, in a way, like maybe a mini existential crisis, in that, like, what does it all mean? I've done all this work for all these years. And, when I do talk to people, they're like, oh, you have such great experience. Are you so knowledgeable? And all of that, which is great. I mean, and but it starts to get to a point where you're thinking, are they just giving me lip service, or is it just that I'm not there? Do I just not interview well? Like, I really don't know. And it's really interesting because it is a very strange place to be. I've never been in this spot before. So,
Yeah. I also think about, like, when you just keep following the path, when's it a trust fall? And what does that look like? If I think really early in my career, when I just knew this before I had kids, I wanted to be a medical assistant. And I did the training, I did the courses, I did the class, I did everything. And I got to the office of where I was going to do my internship and work. And I was working with, and this is not to say it's all doctors, but I just knew that this was not my calling. I was like, this is not something I
right,
want to do
right.
or focus on, even though I was so excited going through all that training. It was kind of, what do I want to do now, or where do I go? And I think I remember after that, I just took I think it was a temp job, and it was with Lockheed Martin. And I sat in a cubicle, Danielle, and all I did was analyze soil data and move a decimal over. And I did it so fast, they thought I did such great work that they gave me other things and they would let me work overtime. And so that was kind of my in between. And then they
Right.
had a bunch of temps, so they started downsizing the temps. And then I was like, what next? So I went back to the temp agency. I don't remember what agency it was back then. It might have been Select Staffing. It seems to stick with me. Went back to that agency and said, what else do you have for me? And they're like, there's this one lady and she just can't keep an executive secretary. And we're going to try to put you and place you there. Do you think you can do it? And I was like, I can handle anybody. So that's how I got in and kind of fell into HR, and then, went to employment and things like that. So the lady I worked for was Gail, and she just had certain expectations and she wanted things to be done a certain way. She had a whole file system. I remember these big file drawers she had in her office. Oh my God. And if something was out of place, the lady, she lost her mind. So
I knew it.
yeah. Yeah. So I think we come to them in different ways, different places. Like, this is a very unique, I feel like, time for you and situation. And it is true. You do have a lot of amazing skills. I mean, you worked for me for years and years and years and years. So I can say that is not lip service. Absolutely. There's some great qualities in things that you have. But like we were talking
Mhm.
about a little bit earlier, was, do you pivot? Do you
Or
continue
goes
to
in.
follow that same path? What does that look like?
Mhm.
So, and when do you know? When do you know it's time?
Yeah, I mean, and like, I mean, the roles that I was looking for are different from what I had done before, And so then I guess that calls into question, like, was that the right move? I guess not. Maybe it just wasn't. I was, applying to the other side of the desk from what I had worked on before, more like wanting to be at a SaaS, work for a technology type thing. And the feedback I got was like, oh, really great, whatever. But it because my skills are not directly aligned that way, I think it's harder for me to make inroads without knowing somebody there and being able to be referred. And I got, oh, one person said to me that, oh, you might get bored here, and I'm like, don't prejudge, like what somebody's going to get bored with or not. And because the reality is that when you're dealing with people, or you're like supporting a client and things like that, you don't usually have an opportunity to get bored. You're pretty much always going to have to be on your toes and constantly evaluating and growing and all of that. So I don't really see that as an issue. But anyway, yeah, so um and I feel like talent acquisition is such an odd place to be right now because of AI and how that's impacting the space. But in reality, there's so much of what AI can do that I don't think companies are doing, and that could have positive impact. But it's making them more afraid to hire because of it, if that makes sense. Like they know that there's this opportunity for it, but it's not being implemented right. So they still need to hire people, but they're afraid to hire.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Like it's almost like a standoff,
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what it seems like in some ways. Plus, the companies like Indeed and things like that that have sort of dominated the market are also changing. And so that kind of creates this. I think there's an opportunity in all of that to say, like, to be a person who has knowledge to kind of help facilitate and negotiate and all those types of things. But I can't quite figure out what that is either.
Yeah, I think there's this really, I can't just keep calling it a paradigm, but there's this shift in this turning point, and I was having a conversation today, and it really made me think. So when you have an organization at the top who maybe their mission is to automate, when you think about what that organization needs to do based on the cost factors that are happening today, the implications of it, all of those pieces. And then you have the people below them that are set out to execute on that plan. But at the same time, it comes at the cost of some people. And then at the same time of that, you also have to look at who has the skills to now function in that new environment and what does that actually look like? Because we hear a lot about skills-based hiring. I don't know that I've necessarily seen a lot of skills-based hiring and how people actually get that right and do that well and translate a skill to say, using you as an example, okay, Danielle, here's all the things that you've done. Now, these are the jobs that would be great for you based on the skills that you've acquired over all of these years, right? And this is what the new job looks like for
You almost
those
need to
types of
like have an
skills.
assessment test or something.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I remember registering with a temp agency and they would test you on different things. And you're like, oh, you can type this many words per minute. So you can do this and whatever. But even like when I was in high school, they had career guidance
Hmm.
classes. I don't think that's the thing anymore. But you would take like tests and you would do certain things to kind of figure out sort of what you wanted your career path to look like. Like if you're really into science, then maybe you might go into medicine or, whatever. And so then there was sort of these things that you could look at to kind of, I think, open your mind to opportunities based on things that you were interested in. So it's sort of that seems like kind of what you're saying.
It's almost like early in your career, early in high school, early in whenever you're taking those tests, right? It's easier to navigate and able to say, okay, these are the things that I like. I enjoy science. I enjoy medical. I enjoy technology, whatever that looks like, whatever that landscape looks like, and then start to shift and shape your path. But even after, I don't know how many people have gotten degrees that are not in their degree right now or even
Right.
practicing
Right.
what
A
they
lot of them.
right. There's a ton of people who have gotten a degree that after they get it, they're like, ah, this wasn't really for me, similar to that medical assistant thing. So when I think about that as well, and after you've had an elongated career or you've done things throughout, how do you really stop, pause, and pivot? I think that's a tougher. And then how do you realign those skills based on where you want to go or maybe where you think you will enjoy? That's a little bit harder. And I think also depending on where you are within an organization, it becomes a little bit harder to pivot that. So there's nothing that I see today. I could be wrong. Someone tell us if I'm wrong or if there's something that exists out there that you can load in yourself as a professional and say, here's all the things that I've done. Now tell me, I mean, there's a lot of people selling stuff that say they could do this. So let's just remove that away from the equation. But if there's a resource where you can say, based on all of these skills that I've gathered in all the jobs that are out there, here's the 10 jobs that I would be great for, or here's the 100 or 500 or whatever. That would be amazing. If I think about when someone's ready to pivot or they're getting burnt out or you in these types of situations to be able to say, here's some thoughts and ideas. I mean, you can do it manually, right? We'll go through and do that piece together and say, what does this look like? But there's nothing that I can think of right now that shows how you pivot
Like chat
those skills.
or something, but even then that would be.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think that's an interesting idea because, I've been thinking like, should I do some certifications, some classes, but even then what do I want to do? How would that help me? Because I mean, I think the issue is like with the pivot I was trying to make to work for a technology company, I recognized that a lot of the people that I would work with or even work for would be younger than me. And I don't have a problem with that. I think that's totally fine. But I think that that may be off putting to other people potentially. And I'm not really sure why, but I feel like, I mean, that's kind of DE and I, right? Is to have people of all different ages, ethnicities, backgrounds, and things as part of a workforce. So the fact that if that is a real thing, then, but I think my feeling is that if you have the skills to do the job, that shouldn't matter. But because I think also when you have people who are older or younger in different roles, it creates a different type of not relationship structure, but like skill level. You know what I mean? Like you're
Mm-hmm.
not all the same. Like I bring different skills than somebody who's younger than me brings to the table because of my life experience, my career experience. So I think in a certain way, if I'm working with someone who's younger than me in more of a junior role than I had before, I think that I could offer a lot to that because I'm would be coming in with a lot more work experience and can help guide people in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
To offer suggestions or I don't really know exactly how I want to explain that, but like it's almost like you could become sort of a mentor in a way, even though if you're in a similar job function, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right because, well, I know you're right. When you look at some of the technology roles and people who are in those roles today are younger. I think there's the average age. I haven't looked this up, but my guess is 28, 29, somewhere in there
Yeah,
would be the
I
average
I would say
age.
that's
Less than 5 years experience probably hasn't led or managed people ever. So now you, one, not only have the less experience, but two, not the leadership experience. How do you gain that experience? There's a real need for, to your point, someone coming into an organization, especially when maybe their current leaders are stretched bandwidth or just trying to run and operate the business.
Hmm.
Learn if I think about by time I got a team and you start out in these little small increments and then you grow and then you have a large team. You got up to 800. So, and I've had as few as one or two people throughout my career. So the growth period of that, but that's all learning too. How do you build your empathy? How do you lead? How do you have the right conversations in those ways? And there's only so much training you can do online for that
Right.
and so much
Right.
conversation. How do you think I should handle this? But to have someone with real hands-on experience would be a huge benefit, especially to the younger generation coming in and really understanding, how to lead. We're in a place where it's very different leading in a lot of organizations. How do you make those hard decisions? How do you have those hard conversations? And for someone who's already very young in their career and now plus leading, that becomes tough. It becomes stressful. It becomes, this isn't what I signed up for. When you think about that generation, right? They want to be mobile at work. They want to be, a lot of them self accountable. Not to say there aren't people out there who want to lead, but to build up that skill set, how do we get there based on how new some of these jobs, roles, and skill sets are at the same time?
Right. And I think, especially, when I think about myself as a young adult, maybe 5, 10 years into my career compared to now, I think my motivations were very different. I was thinking about, was I going to start a family? Was I going to get married? Was I going to buy a house? Like different things that when you get older, you've kind of made those decisions and
Mm-hmm.
either you've done it or you're not going to do it. And so there's less pressure internally and maybe even by your family or friends because if you're 28, I'm just saying hypothetically, like if you're a 28-year-old woman and all your friends are getting married and having kids, you're starting to get that like, oh, maybe I should be doing that too, whether you want to or not, but you're thinking about it. And maybe you're thinking, oh, well, I've only got so many years, whatever. And there's going to be a period in time where you may get married and need to start a family and be away from work and all those types of things that are going to pull you out of your career potentially. That as you get older, and men have a little bit more flexibility in that way than women do. Not completely, because I think it's more, probably a little bit more evenly split now. I hope for couples. But if you are in those situations and you're hiring people that I remember I worked at this company years and years ago. It was a very small company. And so there was only like a handful of us in this office. And then there was like two other offices where each one only had a couple of people. And and during the time that I was there, Kevin and I got married. It wasn't very long before they let me go. They eliminated my job. And I found out from somebody that I had worked with there that the owner was, well, he wasn't the sole owner, but he was a partner, was worried about me like potentially getting pregnant and being off. Like he didn't want to deal with any of that, which is kind of crazy. And of course, I couldn't prove it.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, it was a good move in the end because that's what got me into staffing and recruiting and talent acquisition. At the time, I do remember that. Like, I didn't realize that by me getting married, that that would have this sort of impact on me,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But anyway, but I think that people, whether they're acknowledging that that's what they're doing, I think it's definitely a thing that happens. And, people don't, maybe aren't, maybe even not even objectively realizing that. Maybe it's more subconscious. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, I think there are a lot of unconscious biases out there that people maybe have when you think about bias.
right.
And I do remember early in my career, once I left the Golden Lion, I kept, because one of the things that I talked about one of the episodes was they said I was leaving early when I took Caleb to one day of basketball. And that, and just that experience made me think I shouldn't tell people that I have kids. So once I moved over into some of those other ones, I held it really close to my vest. And then once you got to know me, you knew I had kids or maybe my immediate, but I know a lot of people for a long time. They're like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. And then I used it as kind of a, once I got to a certain place and they were a little bit in a different place, I would say, oh, yeah, I have a kid in college. I have a kid in high school. He's a senior. Or they'd be like, oh, I wouldn't expect that. So I used it throughout my career, but I do remember holding that really close to the vest because I was worried that I would be judged based on that. I think that's a real
Especially as a
thing.
single mother, especially as a single mother, you would think that people might be more flexible about that, but then in reality, they're really not.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's just an interesting thing, and I'm not really, but to your point about like the crossroads, I do feel like that right now, and I feel like there's been a couple of times in my life. Once was years even before that instance I was just talking about, and I split up with my ex and moved back to California. And I was very much in a like, what am I doing with the rest of my life? What do I want to do? And I started exploring a lot of things. Like I went to bartending school for a while and, looked into becoming a massage therapist, a lot of just different things that I thought were interesting that I'd be kind of good at that, like, oh, what would this be like? And, none of those sort of turned into a career of sorts, but it was that idea of like, well, I could do anything right now. Like all my stuff was in storage. I was living with my dad and stepmom. And, it was like, okay, well, what do I do now? But I'm not really in that. I don't have that luxury of like being able to stay with family and not have to worry about bills and stuff
Mhm.
anymore. So
Yeah. I keep going back to being able to skill based pivot. And I do know that on LinkedIn, it says, oh, you have all these skills for the job. But I do know when I look at those, they're jobs that I'm fully qualified for, have done in the past. And it says, I'm not a great match. And there's other jobs that I've never done that I would be like, I don't think I should be doing that. It would say I'm highly qualified for based on my skills. So I feel like this is such a
you know
gap.
what I've right. And what's interesting about that is I've had some jobs that were like suggested to me, and I go to apply, and you know how it'll say like you have 3 out of the 10 skills or whatever. And so then I look at the skills that are not listed and I'm like, oh, but I do have all that. I just don't have it on my profile, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then I'll go to update my profile and it'll say, oh, you already have that in your profile. But your application just said that I didn't, and this
Mm-hmm.
is the one on LinkedIn. So it's like, how do you, and then it'll say like, oh, you can't add any more skills. So like I'll go and it delete some that are old or not relevant or whatever. But yeah, it's very weird because I feel like there's something about the LinkedIn system that makes it harder for you to apply because it wants to force you into paying for that monthly membership, which I'm not going to. I can't afford to. And I don't feel like I should have to do
Mm-hmm.
that. But I feel like that's sort of the point of it is like there's something about the algorithm that is deliberately kind of forcing you to do things that you would only be able to do if you had this premium membership. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's not like it can give you pop-up ads like YouTube or make you watch commercials on Netflix with a cheaper tier. You know what I mean? So like in this way, it's driving you to that because of your behavior.
Yeah. I agree. And why would they even need to do that to a candidate when you have employers who are paying a very hefty premium to advertise their job on there
Exactly.
and get a quality candidate in return to apply?
Right. Exactly. So I think it's a numbers game. They're trying to manipulate the system to show that the candidate engagement for a job is like X number of factors. And then, so that if you're trying to sell this option to a client, a prospective employer, then you can give them this data to quantify why it's important that you pay them for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and that's how everything works, right? I mean, like if you're going to buy commercial ad space, on TV, right? That's the reason why, the Super Bowl ads are the most expensive. It's because of getting eyes on the product. So it's the same idea. But I guess it's become different because from the candidate experience. Although I do remember years and years ago, they had an option like, and I remember talking to a friend of mine about this because I didn't do it, but I remember him telling me about it. Like, this is when it was Monster and Career Builder were the two things. And you could pay like a premium with Monster to have your resume show up at the head, like of the top of the stack, essentially. So if you're a recruiter and you go to pull candidates, and I can't remember if it was tied to the actual application or just in the search results if you're sourcing candidates, but it was that premium thing. And like I had another friend who was like, "Oh, go on Friday afternoon and like tweak your resume a little bit so it'll show up at the, as a recently updated." So there's always been something kind of behind the scenes to kind of rig the system a little bit. But yeah, the idea of like charging people to find work is very icky to me. You know what I mean? Just like there's all these, hey, you should pay a career coach, you should do this, you should, and it's like, okay, I understand. It's a capitalist system. People have every right to try to create a business and have expertise and whatever. But for really big companies who are charging, and we know this because we've paid those bills, we've had those contracts,
Yeah.
we know how expensive these tools are. To then do the flip side to the candidate is just, it's really disheartening, and it is kind of cringy.
Yeah. And to not even have it work for the candidate. So to the skills based point, and you meet or don't meet these skills, if you're going to charge candidates, shouldn't it be what's served up is actually in their wheelhouse in some sort of different way other than that LinkedIn profile? Because you only can put so much, and you only probably should put so much on your LinkedIn profile of
Right.
experience. You can't have a whole dissertation
Right.
out
It
there.
shouldn't be your whole resume,
Right. Why is
you
there
know.
not a better option on there to say, tell me all your skills, load your actual resume here, and then we'll tell you truly what jobs you match to and don't match to based on everything. And even resumes are limited. Also,
Right.
maybe get in there
Right.
agentic AI for us as a candidate to be able to say, based on all the things that this
Right.
person has done,
Exactly.
here's the skills and skills
Right.
based where
Because
you might fit within these roles. It'd be great.
exactly. And that just goes to show that their technology doesn't work, and that it hasn't been upgraded to today's standards. Because remember back in the day when, you'd be looking for an executive assistant or something like that. And the system started to get smarter when you would
Mhm.
go to search resumes, and it would say, oh, if you put in admin assistant, it's going to pull in executive assistant and secretary and, you know, all of these sort of general titles that might encompass what you're looking for. And that was revolutionary, at the time. But there's so much more that can be done behind the scenes that these technologies aren't incorporating. And I don't understand it. I can't imagine that it would be that hard or that, and I mean, I sort of feel like, the LinkedIn's, the Indeeds of the world have sort of gotten so big they can't change now. Like, they can't invest in the technology in a way that like a startup can, or a startup would, because they can get investors, or maybe they just have a small team and, they're kind of, people are grinding it out and making the changes on the fly. Indeed, LinkedIn, those companies are publicly traded companies, and, it's going to take an act of Congress for them to really change, at this point.
Yeah, if you're going to be a candidate-based platform, be a candidate-based platform and evolve with what candidates need, because in both of those instances, both of those cases, they're not evolving to the actual candidate need. It is status quo. Here's your LinkedIn profile. Here's your Indeed resume. Now, here's some jobs you may be a match for, but probably not. But maybe. Because I
Some of
know
the ones
even
that
on
Indeed
Indeed, I still
served
have
to
a
me.
feed. It's jobs that are nowhere in my wheelhouse. Nowhere in my wheelhouse.
No, I've gotten the craziest recommendations from
Mhm.
Indeed. I'm like, what even is this? You know?
They want the clicks
And I
and
think,
visibility. That's my theory.
yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that they want the engagement, because then on the back end they can sell it to employers to
Hmm.
say, this is, we're sending out these notifications, we're suggesting these jobs, and it turns over, and it's just spinning the data. It's just, you know, they're just spin doctors at this point.
I
But it's interesting because, I mean, that sort of was the downfall of Career Builder.
Mhm.
Career Builder was privately held. You never could really see the metrics. You didn't really know. It was so subjective based upon what they presented to you. And if you didn't have clear analytics on your side to be able to kind of weed through that, they could sell you anything. And they did,
Yeah.
So
What Career Builder was supposed to do was pretty exciting. Like when you think about, I mean, it just in their name,
yeah,
Career Builder. You're going to help me build my career.
right,
I mean, you know,
right.
I think there's a real opportunity in the market. I know there's a real opportunity. Let me say that. I know there's a true opportunity to be a true candidate platform, understand skills from a skills based perspective. If you can find a way or figure out a way to do that for candidates and not charge them, and you charge the employers to advertise on your site, you have something super special there and super niche, because now with all these new jobs coming up, with all of these people looking to pivot and saying, what's my next because I can't find anything. I mean, there's a personal reflection we'll do here too, but if you are able to create that as a company on a platform and say, we are truly a candidate led, call it a job board, call it a platform, call whatever you want at that point. And you can come there and say, here's all the things that I've done. Here's my resume. I'm going to plug in everything and spend the time to do this. Now, here's truly my skills based matches. And now you can help employers figure out who would be a good fit for their organization based on what they have open and based on the jobs they're looking to
Right.
fill or how they've shaped and evolved. You have something real there. And that's something I believe, as long as you're able to continue to evolve it, like you said, you can't get stuck. And this is the only thing you do. It has to be something that continues to learn, continues to build, continues to shape as our society and our world shapes. You would have something really special that
I agree. And
people
I think
need.
if you made it so that the candidate, not just building a resume or uploading a resume, but actually did assessments of their skills that were very clear, like, and not the stuff of like, how would you respond to a customer, like as a call center, whatever, like truly more like personality, audits in a certain way, not that extensive, but that kind of idea.
Yeah.
And then, so you could kind of pinpoint people from that perspective. And then if you saw that they had gaps of knowledge, offer that as like upskilling for free, right? It
Hmm.
doesn't have to be, Harvard Business School, but like teaching somebody, if they're interested in finance and they have, certain experience, that, oh, well, they just need a little bit of a refresher on this tool or whatever, so that they can then show that, while they've been looking, they upskilled in these 5 things and this is their results. I think that would be incredibly powerful.
I think so too. And when I think about the teams that I've had over the years, and I've always played to people's strengths and the roles that I put them in. And I like different people that think in different ways and and that's exactly what it was. What are the skills that someone's good at? You highlight those. How would they fit within the organization? How would they make an impact to then tie into that larger picture, which is usually performance improvement or getting to performance or sustaining performance or whatever that looks like as an organization. So if you could do that versus having me as a human figure that out, right? I know I can figure it out sitting there, but it takes time. It takes getting to know someone. There's an investment there in people to say, I know these are this person's 5 strengths. Here's their 2 weaknesses. We're not going to highlight them. We're not going to make them improve them. We'll strengthen them, but we know that this is an area of opportunity or weakness that's not going to hinder them in the job that they're performing, and being able to move people in that way. I know people are great with data, some people not so great with data. That's okay. This person will be handling the data from here on out. So if you can do
Right.
that within a platform and really get it to be understood in the way that we shift and evolve in this market with work and become skills based. That would be
Yeah.
the
And
way to actually get there.
yeah, because I was thinking of like strengths finders and things like that. But, because in reality, a lot of hiring managers out there are not good at hiring. As I've said before, companies don't teach people how to hire. They only, tell, oh, you have this role, somebody put in notice, or you just got promoted, now you've got to fill this job. A lot of people don't know what to do. They only know what they've done, in terms of how they've been hired. And they don't necessarily know how to interview people or what is important to the role. Some people do, that's especially if it's a very skilled role, there may be some very specific tasks involved and things like that are critical to the job. But if it's not, if it's more of a knowledge-based role or a people-based role or something like that, it's a little harder for people to manage that. And so I
Mhm.
think, then there's becomes the issue of roles taking a really long time to fill because people don't know how to do it. So there needs to be more education on that. If you're with a big company, why aren't you training your executives and your middle management how to hire people?
Yeah.
There's training for like people in roles, but I've never seen that offered as part of the training curriculum or the leveling up of skills to say, like, how are you going to fill these jobs? Because to your point, I know there's managers that I've worked for or that I've worked with who have like, okay, well, I can have three people on this team and I know what my strengths are, but I want these other three people to kind of offset what I'm good at, and so that we're a stronger unit. But a lot of people won't do that. They'll just look for a mirror of themselves, which isn't ideal, right? And or so it's just it or they hire people that they know because then they feel comfortable with them and they think that it will work. And so yeah, there's a lot of bad decisions because they don't know what the right decision is.
Yeah. I think I've seen modules on hiring. I'll say that. But strategic hiring, to your point, with how does this person fill the role, crystallizing, getting really crystal clear on what are the actual skills that you need within that role. And then how does someone plug into that? I think that strategic hiring training is really the missing link and how you think about that from I don't know, how you plug into your team, right? Because I know there have been times where I've gone to a company where I have said, I need this person because I know they are going to follow my instructions to a T. They will not deviate. They will not do anything but exactly what I implement and put in place. And that is my benchmark of how I know it's working or not working. Because also, when you come into an
And I don't have
organization,
time to interview 100 people to try and figure out if somebody else would do that.
yes. When you go in and you have an unknown, especially if you're trying to improve performance, and that's what a lot of my career has been, right? Building structures, people, process, technology,
Mhm.
getting to better performance, figuring out where we have labor arbitrage opportunities or where we need to re-optimize something, whatever that might look like. And I know that there will be a lot of people that, did you do that? Oh, yeah. Are you following those instructions? Oh, yeah. Are you doing this in the system? Yeah. Are you following up with your people? Yeah. And I know they're not, but you can't tell because there's so much that you don't see, especially if you're not in an office all working together. So sometimes there is that,
Right.
the truth. I call it my measure, my stick. I need my measuring stick to know if what I'm actually implementing is working or not. So then you need someone who is going to buy the tea, follow instructions. And if they need to deviate and say, hey, this isn't where they're going to come to you and say, this isn't working. We need to think of something else. And then you can tweak and adjust it. So now when you can see, I'll use an example where I think it was 4 or 5 different VPs. And I knew which ones weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing because I could see it in the results. I could see it in their analytics. I can see it, but I had my measuring. I had my measuring stick was not deviating. So I think there's a time and a place for that too across it, but then you need that skill.
Mhm.
You need someone. How do you find that if you don't know someone is that person to say, I need
Right.
someone who is going to take what I say as, for lack of a better term, it is, that's my word, that's my bond, I'm going to trudge forward on
Yeah,
this and
that's
I'm
right.
going to move forward on this. So yeah,
Right.
I think there's not a book. Well, maybe there is a book, or maybe we need to write the book, Danielle, on strategic hiring. Like, how do you strategically place people where they should be? And organizations run into this problem time and time again because there's so many leaders. Let's talk about a reorg really quick. We know companies are going through reorgs right now. And there are people that are plugging people in spaces that have no business doing it because they're not choosing because of the skill. They're choosing in the result. They're choosing because of who they like. They're choosing because of longevity. They're choosing
Cheaper.
because of so many other myriad of factors. And now, guess what? You fast forward 1 year from now, 2 years from now, they're still going to be a C company, a D minus company because of how they're placing their chess pieces. So, to your point, I went on a little soapbox there. This is a really important thing to get right
Yeah.
is how do you strategically hire for skills?
Yeah.
A lot of
And
companies are
do
lost.
you really know what the skills are? Because if it's tasks or a process, that can all be taught,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if it's really a skill that is more nuanced, how do you assess that? How do you know if somebody's going to have that, And that's and I do think that there's a lot of like skill-based jobs out there that are, and people are interviewing for that, but I also think that they're also looking for a very specific answer too,
Mm.
when a lot of times those roles and those experiences are more nuanced than that. It's not like you're saying, yeah, I can use all the Microsoft suite of products, and I can type X number of words, and I can handle high call volume, like things that are actual measurements of somebody's hard skills, if you will. But the more nuanced, like account management and like relationship building, things like that, how do you interview for that? I mean, sure, you can ask specific questions, but I would say that you might like the answer, but is it the right answer or the one that you're expecting? Maybe not, but does that mean that it was the wrong answer? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think it's also when you're interviewing for something like that, relationship building. I mean, you go out and you look to see how connected are they? What are they doing? How do they build relations? So some of that you could see in today's world, like on a LinkedIn. But
True.
the other
That's
piece of
true.
that, and I don't think people take enough stock in, is how did that person build with you? And you just met them, right? This is a stressful situation for the person sitting on the other side as an interviewee.
Er, and the
Well,
interview.
interviewee, because the interviewer should be in a pretty good comfort zone, unless they're a very junior interviewer, right? So the interviewee is in a pretty stressful situation because they want the job. They want to hopefully land this job. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they got a lot of, I don't know. But I mean, but really, in most of the time, they're nervous. There are things like that. But if you're a relationship builder, you should be able to build some sort of common communication point or
Right.
touch point or likability, right? And that's a very much a soft skill, and that's how you measure. People tout. I know people who tout
Sure.
all of these things that they've done, the numbers, that may or may not be theirs, because guess what? You can't really validate that. So you can
That's what I'm
say
saying.
whatever you want to say,
But
and
I think,
sometimes it's whoever lies
like,
the best wins. Which how do you
yeah, because we've seen people who are like, they did that. No, they didn't. Whatever.
didn't I
But
build that? No kidding.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
But the thing, like, I kind of pride myself in being able to talk to anybody
Yeah.
because I worked a lot. I worked years in retail. Wherever I was in a retail sales job, I was always if not the top performer, I was definitely in that top range. Like
Mhm.
I would be the one who could sell everything. So I know that I have that skill, but and I can always talk to people even now. Like I go to the grocery store and people are asking my opinion about stuff. Like approachable in that way. And so it is interesting. So then I'm like, well, am I not interviewing very well? Like, what is it? Because I've always been able to make relationships in places that I've worked. And, people who've reported to me have all said that they really enjoyed reporting to me, that they, is one of their best managers. So it's just an interesting thing because I'm like, what is it that am I doing wrong? You know what I mean? So I don't know. If anybody knows, tell me. I won't be mad.
I would like the feedback at this point. Tell me where
I
I
would
went
really
wrong.
like real feedback.
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you're considering, like, you're at the career crossroads, just going back to that in our, original conversation, is making sure you pause before you push and do something, because there's so many options out there. It can be overwhelming. Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do this? So taking that pause to say, okay, what's really something that I'm interested in? And then refinding your North Star. So what for you as a purpose-driven person does that look like? And where would you like to be, or how would you like to start to really reshape out that path? And how does that ebb and flow? And then kind of naming what is being, I'll call it lost, or what you're grieving, for lack of a better term, because when you change and you pivot in your career too. So I met with someone, I think it was last week. Yeah, it was last week. They all run together. Met with them last week, and they said to me, "Man, you had a really great run there for a while." And I was like, "Yeah, I did. And I'm still on a great run." But there were people who were shocked when I left where I was
Right.
by my own accord, because I did have such a trajectory and a path. And, there was a path there. But for me, it was no longer aligned. But it didn't stop when I left. And when I started to really digest all of that, the grieving process of it, because that was my entire identity that I built and I worked so hard over. And then coming back and saying, you shoulda, coulda, woulda, right? I had this opportunity. I could
Right.
have done this. It could have looked at, especially when you're going through this difficult time or period, becomes the norm. It becomes normal to do that. Taking the time to say, yes, I'm losing these pieces of me, but I'm gaining in all these other areas. And this is putting me on this different path that I was meant to take. And it's really hard. It is hard. We talked about this earlier. It is hard when you cannot see what that path is and what it looks like. And that's when
Right.
you feel kind of, your loss of just really going back to that North Star of what's purposeful. And there's times in our lives where we do things to survive, and there's do things to feel good and to be able to meet our purpose and things like that. So what phase are we in too, I think comes into play. But that's what I would say when I think about,
Yeah.
that career crossroads, and how do you self-assess? How do you bring it back to, where do I go next? And it becomes even harder, like I said, when you can't see it. But if you get back to purpose and say, here's the things I was good at, here's the things that I love to do. Is there anything out there? Or is there something different I need to
Yeah.
be doing?
Yeah. No kidding. Yeah, I need to get out the machete and start whacking away at the path to find it.
Yeah. It's a jungle. It's a jungle that with no path. It's going to be carved.
Yeah, I feel like I've been going this way and it's actually over there.
Yeah. It's so easy to feel like that too, especially when you've just known this one path for so long and you felt pretty good on this path. Like there was nothing, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was some pretty good things for
No.
you on the path and the trajectory that you were on. And then by no,
And I loved what I was doing. I really truly loved what I was doing. And I mean, I know that the particular type of role that I was in before was probably on a downward trajectory. I can
mm,
see that, and I knew that at the time. And but then at the same time, moving towards what I was trying to get to doesn't seem to be working either. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess maybe that wasn't the right thing. So what is the next thing look like?
yeah.
So
What's the pivot from there? How do you keep some of those elements of what you love and like to do? And how do you utilize those skills that you have? And then how do you find what's next and what's out there?
right.
I think there's a lot of people who are in this space. Two, there's a lot of leaders who know by some of these changes that they're getting ready to implement, or they're implementing, or they know are on the horizon, that are dragging their feet a bit to what that, we talked about that high level seat saying they want to optimize, they want to get to, technology automation and things like that, but it's going to be at the cost of some people in certain roles. So then how do you as an organization repivot those people based on their skills? And when they hit their career crossroads, can you still be their landing space and not just say, that's it, your time's done here, it's been good, you've done really well, but
Right, exactly. Because I
off you
feel
go.
like that's sort of the norm now is like, if you are expendable because somebody else can kind of do what you were doing and they're less expensive and maybe younger, there's all these sorts of things and then maybe you are a threat to somebody in a leadership role because you could take their job. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of motivations that aren't necessarily above board, if you will.
Agreed.
So, but I think that's always the case too.
Agreed. Agreed. It's always a bigger picture or unseen motivations.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, should we stop there?
Yeah, I think that's good.
All right. Shout out again to socialjobs.com for sponsoring this episodes of the Worksties. Like, share, follow, comment. Danielle, add.
Yeah, there's a link to buy us a coffee in the show notes and leave us a comment, suggestion, question, anything you'd like for us to cover in a future episode.
Yep. We're on all your favorite listening portals. Don't forget to check us out. Be sure to hit that bell to give us more visibility. We appreciate you. Until next time. Bye.
Bye.